phrase private detective usually brings to mind a sharp fedora and smoking guns. You probably picture a tough hero chasing ruthless mobsters holding heavy Tommy guns down alleys in charge. Cinematic illusions always paint a thrilling picture of endless glamour and very dangerous romance. But the harsh reality of the 1920s reveals a completely different and depressing truth in charge. The actual daily job involved endless nights trapped inside freezing cars drinking bitter cold coffee. We are about to explore the quiet exhaustion hiding behind the famous American detective myth. You are Arthur Pendleton, 35 years old, charge, sitting quietly behind a battered oak desk in a cramped office on the outskirts of Chicago. The radiator in the corner clanks with an erratic rhythm. It only serves to remind you of the freezing winter air seeping through the cracked window pane, charge. You served in the Great War, surviving the muddy trenches of Europe only to return to a country that quickly forgot your sacrifices. Now, you wear a frayed wool sweater instead of a tailored suit, nursing a ceramic cup of coffee that went cold 3 hours ago, charge. The dim light bulb overhead buzzes faintly, casting long tired shadows across the stack of unpaid electric bills. This is the varnished reality of private investigation in the industrial heart of America, charge. It is entirely devoid of the polished mahogany furniture and crystal liquor decanters you see in the moving pictures. The frosted glass door rattles slightly, signalling that someone is hesitating in the gloomy hallway outside, charge. In the nickel and dime pulp magazines, this is the exact moment a stunning femme fatale with crimson lipstick pushes open the door. You might expect a cloud of expensive French perfume to fill the room, accompanied by a breathless plea for help, charge. You might even imagine a wealthy heiress trapped in a deadly, high-stakes conspiracy. But here is where the story takes a drastically different turn. The door creaks open slowly to reveal the harsh, charge, unglamorous truth of your daily existence in this unforgiving city. Instead of a mysterious beauty in a silk gown, a haggard housewife steps hesitantly into your dim office, charge. She shivers uncontrollably in a threadbare coat that offers absolutely no protection against the biting Chicago wind. Her face is pale and deeply lined with the chronic exhaustion born from relentless factory shifts and sleepless nights. She clutches a damp, charge, crumpled handkerchief in one hand while nervously twisting her cheap handbag strap with the other. The heavy silence is broken only by the sound of her ragged breathing as she struggles to find her voice. There is no glamorous mystery standing before you today, charge. There is only the suffocating weight of poverty that constantly hangs over the working-class neighbourhoods of this sprawling metropolis. She does not bring a lucrative case involving stolen diamonds, corrupt politicians, charge, or dangerous mobsters hiding in illegal downtown speakeasies. With trembling, calloused fingers, she reaches into her worn purse and pulls out a single severely crumpled $5 bill, charge. She flattens the green paper carefully on the edge of your scratch-wooden desk with a quiet desperation. Her teenage son disappeared 3 days ago after leaving for his grueling shift at the nearby meatpacking plant, charge. The local police simply told her to go home. They carelessly assumed the boy just ran away from a terribly hard life. That crumpled currency represents her entire grocery budget for the week. Yet she surrenders it without a second of hesitation, charge. You stare at the pathetic sum, feeling the familiar ache of a conscience you cannot afford but also cannot abandon. There are no signed contracts, no dramatic handshakes, charge, and certainly no witty banter exchanged between a charming detective and a helpless damsel. You simply nod slowly, slide the $5 bill into your pocket, and write down the missing boy's name on a scrap of yellow paper. She thanks you with a fragile, charge, broken whisper. Her eyes brim with a desperate glowing hope that you know you might never be able to fulfill. When she finally turns and leaves, the office immediately feels colder, emptier, charge, and significantly more oppressive than it did just a few moments before. You are not a glamorous hero preparing to dismantle a massive criminal empire in a tailored suit and a polished fedora. You are just a tired man in a frayed sweater, charge, trading sleep and comfort for $5 to find a lost kid in a sprawling city of millions. The reality of the private detective is firmly grounded in these tragic mundane encounters that never make it onto the silver screen, charge. You push back your wooden chair and pull your heavy, unlined trench coat from the rusty coat rack. You must now prepare to step out into the freezing Chicago evening to chase down faded footsteps. The glamorous illusion has completely shattered, charge, leaving behind only the bleak prospect of a long, miserable night hunting for ghosts in dark alleys. How exactly does a broken man survive a job that demands so much of his soul while offering absolutely nothing in return, charge? The pulp fiction magazines sold by the roaring elevated train tracks always depict this moment with thrilling dramatic anticipation, charge. They claim a private investigator meticulously cleans his gleaming snub-nosed revolver before stepping out into the dangerous night. You are supposed to confidently slide extra ammunition into your tailored vest while adjusting a stylish fedora charge. Here is where it gets interesting, because the actual reality of your preparation is fundamentally different. You do not eagerly reach for a weapon when the temperature plummets well below freezing charge. The relentless wind howling off the dark waters of Lake Michigan does not care about bullets. A loaded gun will never keep your sluggish blood pumping during a long winter stakeout charge. You will be forced to sit completely motionless in a freezing automobile for 9 consecutive hours. The actual tools of this miserable trade are far less glamorous but infinitely more essential charge. They are the only things ensuring your basic human survival on these unforgiving city streets. You open the bottom drawer of your scarred wooden desk to retrieve the true lifesavers of this profession charge. Your calloused hands completely bypass the empty leather shoulder holster, gathering dust in the dark corner. Instead, you grab 3 extra pairs of thick, painfully itchy wool socks purchased from a cheap store. You carefully wrap a stale charge, rock-hard rye bread sandwich in a piece of grease-stained newspaper. You know this pathetic excuse for a meal will serve as your only sustenance until dawn. The absolute crown jewel of your investigative arsenal is a heavily dented steel thermos charge. It has somehow survived more brutal Chicago winters than you care to actively remember right now. You diligently fill it to the brim with boiling, bitter black coffee that smells of burnt chicory charge. You methodically pack these sad survival rations into a worn canvas satchel resting on the floor. The bag has slowly absorbed the permanent scent of stale tobacco smoke and damp urban decay charge. The authors of those thrilling novels completely misunderstand the actual adversaries you face in the urban darkness. They vividly imagine sudden ambushes by ruthless mafia enforcers hiding in the narrow alleys of the city charge. They write about violent shootouts with desperate bootleggers driving sleek, bulletproof black Cadillacs through the neighborhood. However, the absolute greatest enemy you will intimately fight tonight does not carry a shiny Tommy gun charge. Your most lethal and relentless opponent is the severe arthritis slowly settling into your stiff knees. The pain always arrives after agonizing hours of sitting in one cramped, unnatural position without moving charge. It is the bone-deep chill that systematically numbs your toes and threatens your vulnerable extremities. The cold constantly tries to turn your tired feet into solid, unfeeling blocks of freezing ice charge. It is the heavy blanket of severe sleep deprivation, violently forcing your exhausted eyelids shut. You are fighting a quiet, desperate war against your own failing biology in an industrial wasteland charge. You tightly wrap a frayed woolen scarf around your neck to block out the harsh winter drafts. You blindly grab the heavy metal keys to your battered, chronically unreliable vehicle parked down the street charge. The freezing wind immediately bites into your exposed face the exact second you step outside the building. It feels exactly like shattered glass striking your skin in the unforgiving darkness of the freezing night. You trudge heavily through the dirty charge, grey slush rapidly accumulating on the cracked pavement of the sidewalk. You look exactly like another broken labourer quietly heading to a miserable and exhausting factory shift. The celebrated charge. Highly romanticised predator of the concrete jungle is finally equipped for his thrilling nocturnal hunt. Yet, you are merely clutching a warm steel thermos against your shivering chest to steal its heat charge. The grand cinematic illusion entirely dissolves the moment you finally unlock the frozen door of your car. You are ultimately just a profoundly tired man, desperately hoping your weak bladder holds out until morning charge. The mechanical clock on the cracked dashboard slowly ticks toward 2:30 in the freezing American morning. You are currently sitting completely motionless inside the incredibly cramped, metallic shell of a battered Ford Model T automobile. A heavy charge. Relentless winter rain has finally begun to fall steadily across the desolate suburban streets of Chicago. The rhythmic drumming of the icy water against the thin tin roof creates an incredibly isolating acoustic chamber charge. Sickly yellow light from a solitary street lamp barely bleeds through the completely fogged glass of your rain-streaked windshield. This pale illumination casts long, distorted shadows that dance slowly across the worn leather of the steering wheel charge. The bustling world outside this freezing metal box seems to have completely ceased to exist many hours ago. You find yourself entirely alone in a sleeping city that cares absolutely nothing about your quiet, miserable nocturnal vigil charge. The biting cold of the winter night has steadily penetrated the thin soles of your cheap leather shoes. Your legs have grown completely numb from remaining in the exact same cramped position since shortly after midnight charge. Every single breath you take materializes as a thick cloud of white vapor in the freezing, stale air. You wrap the frayed wool scarf tighter around your neck while desperately trying to conserve your fading body heat. Charge. The dented steel thermos sits securely between your stiff knees, radiating a faint, fading warmth through your heavy trousers. You take a remarkably slow, measured sip of the bitter black coffee to momentarily trick your freezing stomach. Charge. The dark liquid burns a temporary path of comfort down your throat before the oppressive chill quickly reclaims you. You force your heavy, exhausted eyelids to remain open while staring blankly at the dark residential house across the street. Charge. But the real heart of the stick out, you soon discover, is an overwhelming exercise in absolute sensory deprivation. Your right hand instinctively reaches toward the breast pocket of your heavy trench coat to retrieve a crushed cigarette. A desperate charge. Gnawing craving for cheap tobacco aggressively demands your immediate attention in the suffocating silence of the vehicle. The familiar, comforting weight of the silver lighter rests temptingly against your cold, stiff fingers inside the dark pocket. However, charge. You absolutely cannot risk striking a bright flame in the pitch-black interior of this remarkably inconspicuous automobile. A sudden flash of orange light would instantly betray your hidden position to anyone casually glancing out a window. Charge. You must violently suppress the profound urge to smoke, choosing instead to chew silently on a piece of dry bread. The overwhelming monotony of the quiet neighborhood violently threatens to drag your exhausted consciousness into a deep, unforgiving slumber. Charge. The rhythmic, hypnotic sound of the rain striking the metal hood slowly lulls your tired brain into a trance. You watch the steady droplets of water slowly race each other down the foggy surface of the glass pane. Charge. You listen intently to the hollow sound of water rushing aggressively through the metal gutters of the neighbouring houses. There is absolutely no dramatic movement in the quiet, darkened house, standing completely silent at the end of the block. Charge. No mysterious, shadowy figures are desperately sneaking out the back door, clutching stolen briefcases filled with unmarked currency. No sleek black getaway cars are quietly pulling up to the muddy curb with their headlights suspiciously turned off. Charge. There is only the continuous, unrelenting downpour washing the dirty suburban streets clean, while you slowly freeze in the darkness. Your existence is temporarily reduced to watching and waiting for something that will probably never actually happen tonight. Charge. The loneliness of the American night settles heavily upon your tired shoulders like an incredibly damp, suffocating wool blanket. The mechanical ticking of the dashboard clock provides the only reliable measurement of time passing in the void. Charge. You slowly rub your freezing, calloused hands together, desperately trying to generate a tiny fraction of necessary bodily friction. The faint, muffled sound of a distant train whistle echoes mournfully through the heavy rain and the dense urban fog. Charge. It is a remarkably lonely, haunting noise that perfectly mirrors the utter desolation of your current miserable physical circumstances. You adjust your stiff, aching back against the unforgiving leather seat of the vehicle with a quiet, suppressed groan. Charge. Every passing minute feels like an absolute eternity trapped inside this freezing, claustrophobic steel cage of your own making. The sickly yellow glow of the street lamp continues to illuminate the empty, charge, rain-slicked pavement stretching endlessly before your eyes. You command your exhausted body to remain completely still while the endless night slowly bleeds into the early morning. This silent, invisible suffering represents the true, charge, unglamorous reality of private investigation that the thrilling pulp magazines always conveniently omit. You have been heavily conditioned by popular entertainment to expect a sudden, thrilling escalation of violence right now. Charge. You naturally anticipate a shadowy figure aggressively bursting through the front door of the target residential house. You imagine the distinct, terrifying rattle of a Thompson submachine gun shattering the quiet suburban atmosphere. Charge. The cinematic private investigator would now confidently reach for his heavy revolver and prepare for a glorious confrontation. But here is where it gets interesting. Charge. The actual life-or-death battle in this frozen vehicle looks entirely different from those silver screen fantasies. What is the greatest threat to a hidden man trapped in a freezing car during a Chicago winter? Charge. The terrifying enemy slowly creeping up on you is not a mobster wearing a sharp pinstripe suit. The temperature inside this cramped metal box has dropped steadily toward a brutal 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Your exhausted, charge, malnourished body is currently fighting a desperate, losing war against the relentless ambient cold. A sudden, sharp tickle begins to manifest deep within the bridge of your numb, freezing nose. It is the undeniable, charge, terrifying biological prelude to a violent and completely involuntary physical reaction. Your lungs involuntarily expand as your tired diaphragm instinctively prepares to forcefully expel the freezing, stale air charge. The tiny hairs inside your nasal cavity stand on end as the agonizing pressure rapidly builds. This ridiculous, unglamorous moment is your grand high-stakes standoff for this miserable Friday evening. If you release this massive sneeze charge, the sudden explosive noise will echo loudly down the silent street. The violent, uncontrollable jerking motion of your torso will undoubtedly rock the stiff suspensions of the small automobile charge. The squeaking metal of the heavy chassis would sound like a blaring alarm bell in the dead of night. Any watchful, paranoid eyes hiding behind those dark curtains across the street would instantly spot your exact position charge. The entire grueling stakeout would be ruined by a single, pathetic betrayal of your own immune system. You must desperately deploy every ounce of your remaining willpower to suppress this basic human reflex charge. You aggressively pinch the bridge of your nose with your stiff, unresponsive fingers to block the sensation. You squeeze your heavy eyelids tightly shut and force your aching jaw to remain completely locked in place charge. The intense pressure builds aggressively behind your eyeballs as you hold your breath in absolute terror. A sharp pain shoots down the back of your stiff neck from the sheer muscular exertion of resisting charge. Your eyes water profusely as you forcefully swallow the overwhelming physical urge back down into your tight chest. Your heart beats wildly against your ribs, not from dodging lethal bullets, but from stifling a bodily function charge. You sit there quietly panting in the pitch-black cabin, feeling utterly humiliated by your own miserable biology. There is no heroic background music playing to accompany this pathetic, silent victory in the dark. The oppressive silence of the vehicle returns charge, interrupted only by your own shallow, irregular, and ragged breathing. You slowly realize that surviving this demanding profession requires constantly fighting your own physical decay and discomfort. The real villains of this job are always creeping hypothermia charge, chronic arthritis, and the sheer indignity of holding your breath. You wipe a stray tear from your freezing cheek and return your hollow gaze to the empty house charge. You silently wonder how many more years your fragile body can endure this degrading warfare before giving up. The freezing winter rain slowly transitions into a miserable drizzle as the first faint hints of dawn finally approach charge. The heavy darkness concealing your observation post slowly dissolves into the bleak reality of the early Chicago morning. You watch silently as the local milkman begins his daily residential route through the quiet, working-class suburban streets charge. The heavy glass bottles clink sharply against the metal carrier, cutting cleanly through the crisp, completely silent morning air. The targeted residential structure remains absolutely still charge, the heavy front door firmly shut and the dark curtains completely undisturbed. No suspicious characters ever emerged from the shadows, and absolutely no clandestine meetings took place under the winter storm charge. The harsh morning light ruthlessly exposes the absolute futility of your agonizing vigil, confirming your elusive target never returned. You slowly turn the stiff ignition key charge, praying silently that the freezing overnight temperatures have not killed the fragile engine. The battered motor sputters violently for a few terrifying seconds before finally catching and rumbling loudly to life charge. It immediately fills the cramped interior cabin with the overwhelming, noxious smell of rich gasoline and cheap exhaust fumes. You meticulously massage your completely numb thighs charge, desperately trying to force the stagnant blood back down into your freezing calves. The slow drive back toward the inner city is a blurry, exhausting marathon of fighting your own heavy eyelids charge. You struggle constantly to maintain your fading focus, while carefully navigating the slick, treacherous streetcar tracks of the morning commute. You finally park the rattling automobile in a narrow charge, unpaved alleyway directly behind your dilapidated commercial office building. You step out of the metallic shell into the biting morning wind with a heavy sigh of absolute exhaustion. But the true conclusion of this agonizing night, you soon discover charge, is waiting back at the office. You slowly climb the 3 flights of incredibly steep, creaking wooden stairs leading up to your rented workspace. Each heavy footstep echoes loudly down the completely empty, remarkably dusty hallway of the old charge, neglected commercial building. The frosted glass door bearing your fading painted name offers absolutely no warm welcome as you push it open. The small room smells strongly of old paper, stale tobacco smoke charge, and the unmistakable scent of absolute professional desperation. You heavily drop your damp wool coat onto the wooden rack, watching the freezing rainwater slowly drip downwards charge. There is no wealthy client holding a thick envelope of cash, waiting patiently for you to solve their problems. There is only the overwhelming silence of a failing private investigation business, struggling to keep the electric lights burning. Charge. You slowly lower your aching body down in front of the massive wooden desk, holding the black underwood typewriter. You carefully feed a single sheet of cheap thin carbon paper into the heavy mechanical roller of the writing machine. Charge. The sharp clicking sound provides a steady, rhythmic soundtrack that perfectly matches your overwhelming, bone-deep physical and mental fatigue. Your stiff, freezing fingers slowly strike the heavy metal keys. Charge. Loudly echoing the absolute futility of the previous 8 hours, you methodically type out the incredibly depressing phrase, confirming that absolutely no relevant activity was observed during the time frame. Charge. The dark black ink permanently records the utter meaninglessness of your freezing, agonizing vigil in the quiet suburban streets. You will eventually hand this pathetic piece of paper to the worried mother waiting desperately for any news. Charge. You will silently accept the 3 crumpled dollar bills she gratefully hands you for your entire night of invisible suffering. That incredibly meagre financial sum will barely cover the actual cost of the gasoline and stale diner coffee you consumed. Charge. The rhythmic, metallic clacking of the typewriter slowly begins to blur completely into the distant background noise outside. You do not pour a celebratory glass of expensive scotch, because you simply cannot afford such luxurious cinematic indulgences. Instead, Charge, you slowly rest your heavy, throbbing forehead directly against the cool, unforgiving wood of the battered office desk. The profound, inescapable exhaustion finally overtakes your shivering body, pulling you aggressively down into a deep, Charge, completely dreamless slumber. The grand, thrilling climax of your dangerous private investigation is nothing more than a quiet, desperately needed morning nap. You close your eyes knowing the brutal, Charge, unglamorous cycle of watching empty houses inevitably begins all over again tomorrow night. While one exhausted man finds brief solace against a wooden desk in Chicago, the miserable world of private investigation continues spinning elsewhere. Charge. You might assume freezing your limbs off in a dark alleyway is the worst fate a detective can suffer. But here is where it gets interesting. Charge. What happens when the physical exhaustion of the freezing streets is replaced by the mental prison of municipal paperwork? To answer this, you must leave the frozen Midwest behind. Charge. You must travel eastward to the bureaucratic nightmare of New York City during the Roaring Twenties. Meet Tommy Hayes, a 28-year-old former police officer originating from the gritty neighborhoods of Brooklyn. Charge. Tommy is not an aging veteran hiding from his past. He is a dangerously honest man utterly betrayed by the corrupt system he once served. He lost his police badge simply because he refused to accept lucrative bribes flowing through his precinct. Charge. Now he navigates a metropolitan machine that explicitly punishes absolute moral integrity. The sparkling jazz clubs and wealthy elite of Manhattan exist in a completely different universe from the grim reality Tommy faces daily. Charge. His daily battlefield is not a glamorous speakeasy filled with dangerous mobsters and beautiful socialites. Instead, his actual war zone consists entirely of incredibly dense administrative records buried deep within the city infrastructure. Charge. This is a sprawling urban jungle governed entirely by fading ink, thick folders, and countless uncooperative government clerks. The political machine of this era thrives on intentionally confusing documentation. Charge. They effectively hide massive financial thefts in plain sight behind walls of legitimate bureaucracy. There is a painful difference between tracking a moving target and hunting a truth across municipal documents. When you sit silently in an automobile, Charge, your greatest enemies are the cold and your heavy eyelids. But inside the massive public archives, the environment attacks your mind rather than your physical body. You are instantly assaulted by the overwhelming smell of decaying wood pulp and stale dust. Charge. You feel the crushing weight of forgotten human histories pressing down heavily upon your shoulders. The street requires physical endurance, but the archive room demands absolute, agonizing mental submission. Charge. Following a suspected cheating spouse through the chaotic traffic of Broadway provides an unpredictable, dangerous thrill. Your heart pounds as you carefully blend into the moving crowds to avoid sudden detection. Charge. But standing completely still in a silent hallway, searching for a single missing signature offers no such adrenaline rush. The fluorescent lights buzz endlessly above your head, slowly draining the energy from your tired eyes. Charge. Every single page you turn sounds incredibly loud in the absolute silence of the underground facility. You trade the freezing rain of the physical world for a suffocating blizzard of legal terminology. Which environment actually breaks a human spirit faster? Charge. Is it the lonely isolation of a silent suburban neighborhood? Or is it the claustrophobic despair of reading thousands of meaningless property deeds in a poorly ventilated basement? Charge. Tommy knows the bitter answer intimately as he approaches the heavy brass doors of the towering municipal building. He trades the unpredictable physical dangers of the open city for a terrifyingly structured bureaucratic labyrinth. Here, charge, dark secrets are deliberately buried under massive, impenetrable mountains of complicated red tape. In this specific arena of investigation, a loaded firearm is entirely useless against a forged financial ledger. Charge. A sharp mind and stubborn persistence are the only viable weapons against institutionalized corruption. The wealthy criminals of New York do not hide in dark alleyways with cheap switchblades. Charge. They hide comfortably behind endless stacks of complicated tax returns and manipulated property contracts. Tommy slowly descends the cold marble stairs into the suffocating belly of the archive. Charge. He prepares himself mentally to drown completely in a massive ocean of yellowing paperwork. The real criminal underworld of this booming metropolis exists entirely on fragile sheets of paper. Charge. The massive subterranean level of the New York City Hall functions as a sprawling graveyard for forgotten municipal transactions. Millions of decaying cardboard storage boxes are stacked precariously toward the ceiling. Charge. Creating claustrophobic corridors of ancient administrative history. The massive sheer volume of these forgotten historical records creates an intimidating structure designed specifically to discourage any meaningful public scrutiny. The heavy, charge, stagnant air down here is permanently saturated with the unmistakable, suffocating odour of decomposing wood pulp. Thick layers of grey dust coat absolutely every visible surface, undisturbed by the chaotic metropolitan life happening far above. Charge. You navigate these dimly lit aisles feeling like an exhausted tomb raider searching for desperately needed modern financial clues. The flickering incandescent bulbs cast long, charge, unsettling shadows across the endless rows of identical steel filing cabinets surrounding you. Every shallow breath you take draws a microscopic layer of institutional grime deep into your desperately burning, tired lungs. Charge. Tommy sits hunched over a remarkably uncomfortable wooden table, surrounded by towering mountains of incredibly dry tax receipts. Charge. He is currently hunting a charismatic confidence trickster who ruthlessly manipulated a grieving widow out of her entire life savings. This elusive criminal completely abandoned his rented apartment. Charge. Leaving behind absolutely nothing except a meticulously forged municipal property deed. In the romanticized cinematic universes, a handsome detective would simply intimidate a local bartender to instantly acquire the necessary information. Charge. But the real secret of this exhausting profession is that actual progress requires enduring countless hours of terribly boring, solitary tedium. Charge. Tommy must systematically review thousands of incredibly mundane property transfers to locate a single matching signature hidden within the archives. Charge. 14 agonizing hours have slowly evaporated since he first descended the worn marble staircase into this isolated underground administrative dungeon. His heavily strained eyes are burning fiercely. Charge. Desperately trying to focus on the fading black ink covering the brittle pages. He meticulously slides his calloused thumb across the sharp edge of yet another perfectly useless yellowed government property declaration form. The remarkably dry, charge, aging paper suddenly slices cleanly through his thick skin, leaving a painfully stinging microscopic paper cut behind. A tiny droplet of dark red blood slowly forms on his index finger, forcing him to momentarily pause his endless investigation. Charge. He silently wraps a dirty linen handkerchief around the stinging wound, carefully ensuring he does not permanently stain the official documents. Charge. There are absolutely no thrilling car chases through the crowded avenues of Manhattan to temporarily elevate his rapidly dropping heart rate. There is only the maddening, charge, incredibly repetitive sound of brittle paper turning loudly in the suffocating silence of the massive room. His lower back continuously screams in absolute agony from maintaining such a rigidly unnatural posture on the unforgiving wooden library chair. Charge. The overwhelming mental fatigue slowly transforms the neatly typed alphabetical letters into completely meaningless, floating black shapes across the white pages. He aggressively rubs his throbbing temples. Charge. Desperately trying to force his exhausted brain to properly process the endless numerical tax sequences. This particular type of investigation completely breaks a man down by methodically grinding away his remaining sanity and physical patience. Charge. The battered silver pocket watch resting on the wooden table quietly indicates that the outside world is currently experiencing late afternoon. However, charge. The oppressive basement environment completely strips away any natural perception of passing time or changing external weather conditions above ground. Tommy mechanically opens the 74th cardboard storage box of the agonizing day. Charge. Unleashing a thick cloud of suffocating historical dust. He slowly coughs into his tired shoulder, tasting the bitter flavour of century-old industrial pollution trapped within the municipal basement. Charge. His relentless pursuit of the elusive swindler has been reduced to an incredibly pathetic staring contest with completely inanimate government paperwork. Charge. The desperate widow waiting anxiously in his dilapidated Brooklyn office is the only motivation keeping his bleeding fingers turning the pages. Just as his exhausted mind finally begins contemplating absolute defeat, a tiny, charge, seemingly insignificant typographical error suddenly catches his wandering attention. The carefully forged property address listed on an obscure commercial tax receipt perfectly matches the distinct handwriting of the vanished criminal. A sudden, charge, overwhelming wave of profound professional relief instantly washes over his incredibly stiff, desperately aching, and completely exhausted physical body. Charge. He has finally located the hidden thread that will inevitably unravel the entire fraudulent financial operation designed by the ruthless thief. This quiet, solitary victory in a dusty basement perfectly represents the unglamorous, charge, physically painful reality of achieving true justice in America. The grand conclusion to this demanding investigation features absolutely no dramatic violence, just a silent man carefully copying an address down. Charge. Tommy holds the small yellowed receipt delicately between his freshly injured fingers. The newly copied address sits plainly on his personal notepad in dark ink. There is no sudden crash of dramatic orchestral music playing in the background. Charge. No dangerous henchman burst violently through the heavy archive doors to stop him. The sprawling underground basement remains completely silent and entirely undisturbed around him. This tiny scrap of paper represents the absolute financial ruin of the swindler. Charge. The grieving widow in Brooklyn will finally get her stolen savings back today. Tommy folds the fragile paper twice and slides it into his pocket. But here is where the reality deeply subverts all popular cinematic expectations. Charge. A fictional Hollywood detective would immediately load his revolver and kick doors down. Tommy pushes his wooden chair backward to stretch his incredibly stiff spine. A sudden sharp spasm of terrible pain violently courses through his lower back. Charge. 14 exhausting hours of rigid hunch posture exact a severe physical toll today. He slowly gathers his worn trench coat alongside his completely empty thermos flask. His exhausted legs tremble slightly under the heavy crushing weight of his fatigue. Charge. He happily leaves the suffocating dust of the underground municipal records room behind. The freezing evening air of New York City sharply hits his tired face. Normal citizens rush rapidly past him toward their warm homes and waiting families. Charge. Tommy does not rush toward the newly discovered hideout of the criminal. He walks 3 short blocks south toward a bustling corner drugstore. The brightly lit store window displays essential medical supplies and various cheap cigars. Charge. A passing electric tram rings its loud brass bell in the busy intersection. He steps inside and heads straight for the isolated wooden public telephone booth. This small enclosed glass box is the actual mundane stage for his confrontation. Charge. The heavy folding door shuts tightly behind him to completely block the noise. He reaches deep into his heavy coat pocket and retrieves a silver nickel. The small cold coin drops loudly into the metal slot of the machine. Charge. He methodically dials the direct number for the local police precinct front desk. A gruff, exhausted voice answers through the crackling static of the receiver line. Tommy dryly recites the exact residential address and the name of the suspect. Charge. He formally requests a dispatch patrol unit to apprehend the man for fraud. He provides his private investigator license number for the official police incident report. The brief conversation lasts less than 2 minutes from start to finish. Charge. He gently places the heavy black earpiece back onto its metal hook. The massive criminal investigation officially ends with a remarkably quiet metallic click sound. The local uniformed officers will handle the actual physical arrest and subsequent paperwork. Charge. There will be absolutely no glorious front-page newspaper headline printed for Tommy. The ruthless swindler will definitely sleep in a cold jail cell tonight instead. The desperate widow will soon receive a very comforting telephone call tomorrow morning. Charge. Tommy simply pulls his wide wool collar up against the biting winter wind. He turns toward the nearest underground subway station to begin his long commute. A persistent dull ache radiating in his lower back is his only trophy. Charge. This beautifully quiet anti-climax is exactly how real justice operates in the shadows. The profound physical exhaustion inevitably fades away after a few days of uninterrupted, heavy sleep inside a quiet, dark room. However, charge. The silent psychological burden of this remarkably solitary profession accumulates slowly over many incredibly empty and meaningless years. Charge. You spend countless agonizing hours existing completely alone, within the oppressive shadows of a massive, sprawling industrial metropolitan landscape. Charge. The glamorous cinematic portrayals completely ignore the devastating mental deterioration caused by this extreme daily isolation from normal society. Charge. A private investigator essentially functions as an invisible ghost, haunting the busy peripheral edges of our modern industrial world. You are constantly surrounded by millions of living, breathing citizens. Charge. Yet you remain entirely disconnected from their vibrant daily reality. The heavy silence of an empty apartment becomes your only loyal companion after finishing a lengthy, frustrating surveillance job. Charge. You slowly realize that observing the intimate tragedies of absolute strangers has completely eroded your own capacity for human connection. Charge. Arthur spends the vast majority of his waking existence securely trapped inside a freezing metal box resting on four wheels. The cramped interior of his aging Ford vehicle is certainly not a romantic vessel meant for thrilling high-speed pursuits. Charge. It actually serves as a tiny claustrophobic prison cell where his tired mind is left to wander dangerously unsupervised. He sits completely motionless behind a heavily frosted steering wheel while the rest of the thriving city sleeps peacefully around him. Charge. The small glass windows firmly separate his stagnant, isolated reality from the dynamic, moving world continuously happening right outside. Charge. Every passing pedestrian represents a fully realized human life that he can only quietly observe from a safe, hidden distance. Charge. This relentless passive observation creates a profound psychological distance that fundamentally alters how a tired man perceives his own existence. He is no longer an active participant in the great American society. Charge. But merely a forgotten spectator sitting in the darkness. The daily professional routine consists exclusively of incredibly monotonous tasks that slowly drain away every ounce of youthful, optimistic passion. Charge. There is absolutely no glorious prevailing triumph when a cheating spouse is finally caught stepping out of a cheap motel room. There is only a depressing, lingering sadness that quickly permeates the incredibly stale air trapped inside the cold metal vehicle. Charge. You meticulously document the tragic failure of broken human relationships on cheap yellow paper using a leaky stolen wooden pencil. Charge. The overwhelming accumulation of these minor domestic tragedies eventually constructs a deeply cynical worldview that becomes impossible to simply shake off. Charge. You learn to expect the absolute worst personal behavior from every single person walking confidently down the brightly lit city sidewalks. Charge. This manufactured professional paranoia slowly bleeds into your private personal reality until you can no longer comfortably trust your own thoughts. Now listen carefully. Charge. Because the underlying psychological reality of this historical isolation is about to become uncomfortably familiar to you. Charge. How entirely different is Arthur sitting alone inside his dark, freezing vehicle from your own current daily professional corporate existence? Charge. You might quickly assume that a modern corporate lifestyle shares absolutely no common ground with a depressed private investigator from the 20s. However, Charge, the suffocating emotional confinement experienced inside that rusty automobile perfectly mirrors the modern tragedy of the fluorescent office cubicle. Charge. You also spend 8 exhausting hours every single day securely trapped within a tiny designated square of completely artificial corporate space. Charge. Your glowing computer monitor serves the exact same isolating psychological function as the rain-streaked windshield of a parked surveillance vehicle. Charge. You sit completely motionless in a comfortable ergonomic chair while the precious hours of your finite life quietly slip away unnoticed. Charge. The striking historical parallels between these two seemingly different generations reveal a profoundly sad universal truth about the American workforce. Charge. Both individuals are essentially paid to perform incredibly repetitive, useless tasks while remaining completely disconnected from any meaningful, tangible final product. Charge. The exhausted investigator methodically typing out useless surveillance reports feels the exact same lingering emptiness as a modern data entry clerk. Charge. You both stare blankly through transparent glass barriers at a vibrant outside world that you are temporarily forbidden from actively joining. Charge. The overwhelming sense of profound urban loneliness transcends the vast passing decades to permanently connect these two distinct eras of human labour. Charge. We have simply traded the freezing midnight street stakeout in a dark alley for the equally isolating, climate-controlled, corporate working environment. The metal vehicle may have eventually transformed into a padded fabric partition. Charge. But the deeply lonely box remains exactly the same today. You have endured the freezing midnight stakeouts and inhaled the toxic dust of endless municipal archives. Charge. Your physical health is steadily deteriorating while your meager bank account barely covers your basic weekly expenses. The psychological burden of constant isolation slowly erodes your ability to connect with normal society. Charge. So why do these exhausted men continue to choose this remarkably miserable path every single day? It seems entirely irrational to voluntarily subject yourself to such chronic physical pain and profound emotional emptiness. Yet, charge. They wake up every evening and willingly step right back into the unforgiving shadows. To understand this stubborn dedication, you must carefully observe the rapidly changing American landscape surrounding them. Charge. The Roaring Twenties are currently transforming every major city into a blinding spectacle of unprecedented industrial progress. Massive steel skyscrapers are aggressively piercing the smoky clouds above the bustling streets of Chicago. Charge. Thriving factories are continuously pumping out shiny new consumer goods for an increasingly materialistic urban population. The entire country is desperately rushing toward a supposedly glorious future built upon relentless mechanical efficiency. Charge. The average working man is quickly being absorbed into this massive, unforgiving industrial corporate machine. Millions of citizens are happily trading their personal autonomy for a steady, predictable weekly factory paycheck. Charge. They stand rigidly shoulder to shoulder along the incredibly deafening and repetitive Ford assembly lines. A factory worker spends 10 grueling hours a day mindlessly tightening the exact same metal bolt forever. Charge. They are no longer treated as individual human beings, but merely as replaceable biological cogs functioning within a giant engine. But the real secret is that these solitary investigators are actively fighting a silent war against this industrialization. Charge. Is it not better to freeze in a rusty automobile than to lose your soul inside a deafening factory? Arthur and Tommy willingly accept the physical suffering because it guarantees them a precious sliver of absolute independence. Charge. They absolutely refuse to surrender their personal agency to a wealthy corporate manager wearing a tailored suit. Their dilapidated offices and freezing vehicles represent a sacred sanctuary away from the crushing demands of modern capitalism. Charge. Nobody tells a private investigator when they are allowed to take a short lunch break. You are completely free to drink terrible cold coffee and smoke cheap cigarettes whenever you desire. Charge. You dictate your own chaotic schedule, even if that schedule forces you into the dark, rainy streets. You never have to ask a supervisor for permission to close your burning, exhausted eyes. Charge. This fragile sense of freedom is the ultimate currency that keeps these tired men moving forward. The money is undeniably terrible, but they are still the undisputed masters of their own miserable destinies. Charge. Operating outside the traditional boundaries of society provides a strangely comforting layer of protective anonymity. You are basically a wandering ghost navigating through a rapidly modernizing world that demands constant conformity. Charge. While the rest of America punches a heavy metal time clock, you simply fade away into the urban shadows. You are observing the chaotic world without ever being forced to blindly march alongside the mindless crowds. Charge. They endure the bone-chilling cold simply because it allows them to remain completely human. The crippling loneliness becomes a small price to pay for retaining your fundamental individual identity. Charge. Every single lonely hour spent watching a silent building is an act of quiet rebellion against the system. They have traded financial security and physical comfort for the rare privilege of owning their own time. It is a desperately hard life. Charge. But it belongs entirely and exclusively to them alone. You finally realize that true freedom often looks incredibly pathetic to the untrained outside observer. The exhausted detective walking home in the morning light is actually the freest man in the city. Charge. The stark reality of sitting in a freezing car eventually faded from public memory across the nation. Yet the cultural hunger for a lone figure standing against corruption never vanished from the American soul. Charge. This was where the fascinating transformation officially began, turning tired men into immortal cinematic icons of rebellion. Writers sitting comfortably in sunlit California offices decided to completely reshape these miserable stories for eager moviegoers. Charge. They took the sleepless nights, cheap coffee and isolation, remaking them into something dangerously glamorous and deeply appealing. Rumpled wool sweaters and worn-out boots were discarded in favour of sharp fedoras, pulled low over shadowed eyes. Charge. Threadbare winter coats transformed into sleek leather jackets and elegant trench coats billowing dramatically in the cold wind. Instead of writing notes on cheap yellow paper, the fictional hero carried a sleek revolver and delivered sharp wisecracks. Charge. The humiliation of waiting in a broken-down car became a thrilling stakeout filled with sudden danger and mystery. Society desperately needed a romanticized champion who could defeat modern corporate corruption without ever breaking a single sweat. Charge. Exhausted housewives begging for a lost child were replaced by glamorous women walking through smoky, dimly lit jazz lounges. Every encounter with a client became a dangerous dance of wits under the glowing neon signs of downtown charge. The desperate poverty and mundane cruelty of real human tragedy were polished until they gleamed on the silver screen. Hollywood realized everyday viewers would never pay money to watch a tired man freeze while staring at buildings charge. They needed a fierce rebel, wrapped in shadows, who always found the hidden truth before early morning arrived. Now let us examine why this comforting fabrication became an enduring pillar of 20th century American mythology and culture charge. The fictional detective served as a psychological shield for a nation terrified of losing its humanity inside factories. People sitting safely in movie theatres wanted to believe one stubborn man could look the powerful elite in eyes charge. They projected all their quiet workplace frustrations and secret rebellions onto a silver screen hero who never compromised. The man in the trench coat became the ultimate fantasy of absolute personal freedom in a conforming world. Even today, charge. Decades after those cold stakeouts and dusty archives dissolved into history, the striking silhouette remains imprinted. Whenever a cynical voice narrates a dark urban decay story over a saxophone, we step back in time, charge. We gladly surrender to the comfortable illusion because it lets us escape the monotonous routine of modern lives. The romanticized legend completely eclipsed the tragic truth, ensuring the solitary investigator would live on forever as guardian, charge. It is a brilliant story we never tire of repeating, because it speaks directly to our human longings. The transformation required smoothing away every rough edge that made the original occupation thoroughly miserable and depressing, charge. No audience wanted to witness hours of silent boredom interrupted only by agonizing joint pain in freezing weather. Cinematic magic demanded high stakes, beautiful women, and moral clarity where grey reality once reigned supreme, charge. The lonely operative transformed overnight from an ignored spectator into the ultimate moral compass of a broken city. This grand illusion provided a powerful emotional release for millions of citizens trapped in unfulfilling industrial routines, charge. Consider how the dreary paperwork in municipal archives was suddenly elevated into intellectual battles against criminal masterminds. Sorting through thousands of dusty tax receipts became a brilliant display of unmatched deductive genius and focus, charge. The harsh fluorescent lights of government offices gave way to dim office spaces illuminated by dramatic desk lamps. Every weary sigh of exhaustion was reinterpreted as world-weary wisdom earned through a lifetime of dangerous adventures, charge. The myth successfully swallowed the man, leaving behind an indestructible cultural archetype that transcends generations easily. This enduring archetype continues to shape how modern society pictures independence, justice, and quiet personal defiance today, charge. We look at the rainy streets through the same nostalgic lens, crafted by decades of classic Hollywood storytelling. The melancholy truth of the working-class investigator dissolved completely into a shimmering neon dream of absolute freedom, charge. Yet beneath the fedora and the tailored coat, the weary human heart remains fundamentally unchanged and recognizable. That quiet longing for a world with clear boundaries is why the legend refuses to fade away, charge. The studios understood that people desperately needed heroes who answered to no authority but their own conscience. By reshaping historical reality, they offered a comforting escape hatch from the overwhelming pressures of modern capitalism, charge. We celebrate the fictional detective because he represents the untamed spirit living inside every ordinary working citizen. The legend provides warmth during our coldest nights, reminding us that individual defiance still matters profoundly, charge. And so the solitary ghost of the pavement lives on as our favourite eternal cinematic companion. Outside the frosted glass window of that dilapidated office, the cold Chicago rain continues to fall steadily upon the empty pavement below, charge. The rhythmic tapping of the heavy iron typewriter finally slows down to a hesitant crawl before stopping completely. The exhausted investigator slowly pulls the final sheet of cheap yellow paper from the carriage, charge. He carefully places the completed document atop a growing stack of closed case files. It is a profoundly quiet moment, a brief sanctuary where the overwhelming weight of the city temporarily lifts from his aching shoulders, charge. As you lie there listening to the steady rhythm of the storm tonight, you can finally allow your modern burdens to quietly slip away. The relentless pressure of looming corporate deadlines, demanding emails, charge, and suffocating performance metrics no longer holds any power within this peaceful midnight sanctuary. You have successfully navigated the exhausting complexities of your demanding world today, charge. You survived another long shift in the relentless machinery of modern society. Just like the solitary man, sitting in his cramped workspace. You have earned the absolute right to set down your heavy mental burdens and rest. Charge. The weary detective reaches over to the battered desk lamp, turning the small brass switch to plunge the dusty room into a comforting darkness. He leans back into the worn leather of his creaky wooden chair. Charge. Letting out a long sigh as his heavy eyes finally drift closed. There are no more deceptive shadows to unravel tonight. There is absolutely nothing left to worry about until the morning sun rises over the city again. Charge. Thank you for joining me on this quiet journey through the hidden corners of the vintage American underworld. I wish you a very calm, deeply restful, and profoundly peaceful night.